shadowy. Oh, I'm finally on. I thought it would happen more quickly than that if I just kept going. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this extraordinary venue. I hope you enjoyed the walk. It is somewhat off track, but I think you'll find this conversation has been well worth the trek. And this conversation is titled Fighting Gendered Disinformation, How Women Journalists Stand Up to Dictators, Shadowy Foreign Agents, and Digital Conspiracy Networks. I'm Julie Posetti, I'm Global Director of Research at the International Centre for Journalists, ICFJ, and I'm honoured to be joined by four extraordinary women journalists today to take part in this conversation. One of them, Nobel Laureate Maria Ressa, learned how to stand up to a dictator, first by surviving being targeted by gendered disinformation, which was linked to former Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte and his supporters and his government. Rana Ayub, who is here to my left, has been targeted by misogynistic right-wing trolls in India, aligned to the ruling party. The BBC's Marianna Spring has been subjected to sexist abuse and threats while reporting from the front lines of the disinformation war and covering the implosion of Twitter most recently. And the Observer's Carole Cadwalladr to my right has been misrepresented and maligned in a misogynistic trolling campaign with links to Russian actors after exposing the Cambridge Analytica scandal. And reporting critically on Brexit. So some very polarising issues and some very important accountability journalism. As you can clearly see, Carole and Rana are with me here in the room, and Maria, who is in a remote location in the Philippines attending a wedding, if she could be heard at this moment, would apologise for the band playing in the background when she does begin to speak. And Marianna is in the UK working on these issues, investigative reporting, very directly connected to these issues. So I've gathered these women to have a conversation about gendered disinformation, which is one of the main threats to journalists, but also a very significant threat to democracy and a very significant threat to the rights of women globally. Women journalists are effectively a proxy for the kind of targeting and attacks directed at women who think publicly, who speak truth to power, who have expertise and dare to raise their voices. And they are being shut down systematically through campaigns involving misogynistic networks, disinformation networks, and that's where you get this intersection that creates gendered disinformation. And the way in which these conversations online that become increasingly toxic, that lead to what we call online violence, develop is designed in part to suppress, to chill, to silence, and to effectively roll back women's rights that have been gained over the past decades. We see a graphically visible array of forms of abuse against the women journalists sitting here in big data case studies which we have produced, studying to date around 18 million social media posts directed at these women and other journalists we've been studying over the past 4 to 5 years. And we'll go through some of the data. But one of the key data points, which comes from a study that I led called The Chilling, which was commissioned by UNESCO and published by UNESCO and ICFJ, found that of 700 women from around the world, journalists who had been exposed to gender-based online violence in the course of their work, 41% of those had actually experienced online violence in what they described as a context of coordinated disinformation campaigns. So this tells us how pertinent the function of disinformation is in targeting women journalists, the objective of which is always to shut them down, but also to shut their reporting down. So Rana, I want to come to you first, and just to give some context from our recently published research about your particular situation in India as an investigative journalist in India. We studied 9 million tweets directed at you over an 18-month period, and we found that 62% of the abuse that was directed at you was predominantly personal abuse, Also, 24% of all of the abuse that you experienced was sexist, misogynistic, or sexually explicit. And in your case, most viscerally, the most prominent abusive hashtag in all of those tweets directed at Rana was the pernicious word, the portmanteau, prostitute, which is clearly designed to diminish Rana and the many other women who are subjected to abuse using that term, both at a personal and a professional level. So I'm sorry to have to start by setting that situation out, Rana, but as you've said yourself, seeing that data and allowing it to establish the facts as you've experienced them, so the abuse as you've experienced this, which has been very visceral, is now laid out in text, in numbers, in ways that hopefully make it clearer for other people to see. But you were sitting here on this stage with me a year ago, having been pursued by the Indian state legally in a number of different cases, having been stopped at the airport and refused permission to travel 48 hours earlier, and having to go to court to get permission to travel, which you shouldn't have had to do because there was no order, in effect, preventing you from doing so. For the people who are here and those watching online who may recall that event last year where you were very warmly welcomed because we thought you wouldn't make it, wouldn't be allowed to travel, how has the situation that you've been enduring progressed in the context of what we know is an ongoing online violence campaign that has really helped enable the state-based abuse?
Good afternoon, everybody. It is an honor to be in the company of all these amazing women who might be in different geographical locations right now, but the playbook that is being used to target each one of these women is exactly the same. Clearly, they're learning from each other. And when I used to read about Maria's case back in the day, I was like, and then it happened to me, and I'm like, oh, they're learning from each other. So last year I was here to give my keynote when I was stopped at the Mumbai airport, and yesterday when I was coming, I was like, I'm going to be stopped at the immigration. So it was a very, very last-minute affair. But and to answer your question, nothing really has changed between last year and this year, and I don't think it's going to change because it's not meant to change, because besides the legal warfare, besides the cases that I am facing, money laundering, tax evasion, money laundering is the new glamorous thing that journalists are now attacked with. Money laundering, tax, tax, defamation. We also now face this public humiliation on social media. So last year when I faced the money laundering charges for 3 different days, Indian news channels were only obsessed with my fraud, and the Twitter hashtag on those 3 days was Rana Yub fraud, Rana Yub con, right? It is difficult to explain in words. I mean, we call ourselves brave and courageous. I've stopped doing that, though. I don't think any one of us has to be really brave and courageous to be going through what we go through on a daily basis. But it is meant to silence, discredit us, and plant a shadow of doubt in the minds of people that there is some shady business going on here, right? I mean, money laundering. Earlier it used to be like defamation and, treason. Oh, the government is being excessive in targeting journalists. But now they use corruption charges because some of it ends up sticking because people end up believing that there could be something there. So the governments are learning new methods. The ICFJ study that says that every 14 seconds that there is a tweet against me, right? It's coordinated. When the spokesperson of the ruling party on Twitter says that he saw my father in Germany sitting drunk in a debauched state soliciting prostitutes. My father has never left India except to go for Hajj, and he suffers from dementia. That's the ruling party spokesperson, and when that happens, it trends on Twitter that a debauched father and a debauched daughter, it trends on Twitter. And then when I lend my voice to solidarity with Indian women who are fighting for the right to wear the hijab, these people will pick up my images from my Instagram and say, look at her, she's wearing beachwear, short clothes, but look at her hypocrisy fighting for women in India to fight to wear the hijab. When I was stopped from leaving India the last time at the airport, there was a prominent Twitter handle which had my boobs with 1.77 million written on it, that I'm absconding the country with that kind of money. I filed a charge with Mumbai police, nothing happened. Just before coming here, literally a week ago, I again filed a case with Mumbai police where I've been getting this explicit rape and death threats where this person tells me how he's going to gang rape me and my sister and my mother, right? The Mumbai police registers a case against that person. For 2 months, he deactivates his account. He realizes there's no action. He comes back, and this time he says, I'm going to kill you in an extrajudicial murder in a fake encounter like these Muslim legislators on TV. This is how you are, this is not just legal warfare, this is the online harassment that spills over offline to discredit us. If you Google me right now, you will not see my journalistic stories, you will only see the cases and allegations against me, the fraud and the con. So
Yeah.
that's why this study is so important, because it is a data set that finally says that, listen, these are not people in isolation. It is a planned, targeted attack where members of the ruling party set the precedents and they'll unleash the trolls on you to silence you.
And Maria, if we can bring you in now, band in the background notwithstanding. Rana mentioned there that we know that online violence doesn't stay online. It is real-world violence. In fact, according to our study, we found that 73% of those women we surveyed had experienced online violence, but in the course of their work, which is an important aspect of this, but among that group, 20% of them said they had experienced offline harm, that they connected directly to the online violence they'd experienced. And that did include lawfare. And in your case, where we studied over 500,000 Facebook and Twitter posts abusive towards you, we noted that the online violence you're experiencing, which included the seeding of narratives that you were criminal, that you needed to be brought to the Senate and so on, were part of the enabling environment for your persecution and prosecution and ultimately conviction. Now, you can bring us up to date because several things have happened in your case since we were last in this festival, certainly, speaking about your experiences. And one of the things that's happened is you've actually written a book which is designed to educate us about how to deal with this totalitarian playbook, which very much includes the techniques of gendered disinformation, called How to Stand Up to a Dictator. So there's a lot there to introduce you to this audience, and you really don't need any introduction having won the Nobel Peace Prize, but there it is. So thanks so much for joining us, Maria. But if you can please share with us how the functions of disinformation have affected you in all of the various battles you've been waging for free press.
Well, first of all, thank you. The band stopped. They listened.
Outstanding.
I do what they did. Well, first of all, like Rana, how incredibly it's wonderful to be with you today. And let me quantify what Rana said, right? What exactly is it? Let's call it what it is: information operations. This is power using and exploiting social media, the design of social media platforms to attack journalists, women activists, human rights activists, women politicians. In the Philippines, as early as 2017, we saw that women were attacked at least 10 times more than men. That was 2017, and it's only gotten worse. What's the goal? Really two. The first, and again, Rana said some of this, but when you pull out, the first goal is to use free speech to stifle free speech, right? This fire hose of falsehood to pound you to silence. There's that the effect on the target. And let's be clear, no one but the target sees or nor feels the impact of this kind of exponential attack. And then the second part is, what does everyone else see? They see astroturfing or a bandwagon effect. So, in my case, it was the meta-narrative that was seeded, and this takes years, right? So you might think that, well, I saw one insult, but it doesn't quite work like that. A meta-narrative is seeded, and then it's pounded, and it's pulled up, and there are ebbs and flows, but essentially, in my case, in 2016, the meta-narrative journalist equals criminal said 1 million times. Some people, Rana alluded to this, where there's smoke, there's fire. Keelan Gallagher, KC, my lawyer who has helped try to deal with this stuff. Well, let me show you what the playbook is, right? So say a lie 1 million times, that's the meta narrative. And then a year later, so it kind of percolates like fertilizer. right, for the lie. And then it comes top down from President Duterte himself, our president, a year later. And he said this in his State of the Nation address. About a week after that, we get our first subpoena. And then it just continues, right? 2017, 2018, we get our first shutdown order. 14 investigations in 2018. By 2019, I begin to get arrested. And then it follows 10 arrest warrants in a little over a year and a half, and the conviction in 2020. So look at how reality was turned upside down. This is my 37th year as a journalist, but by 2020, I was convicted, right? So technically, it's what starts as a lie, then becomes power uses it to turn reality upside down. I'm looking forward to hearing what Carole has to say, in terms of gaslighting. This is something that we've talked about a lot. But here's the final thing. Do not lose hope, right? We go through the fire, at least in my case, those 10 criminal charges that were filed. Well, now they're down to 3. As January this year, I had 34 years, a possible 34 years in prison. On January 18th, it disappeared like that. Rappler and I were acquitted, and we move on, right? But the point is, women journalists should not have to live through this, because online violence is real world violence, along with dealing with these attacks psychologically. As a group, as Rappler, we've had to increase security up to 8 times between 2016 and 2018. So we keep going.
Maria, that you've been attacked in these ways with the objective to tear you down, tear down your credibility, tear down Rappler's credibility, ultimately to manufacture consent for your persecution. And I should point out, for everybody's benefit, that although several decades were shaved off your potential prison sentence, you still face those other charges, as we've mentioned, and there are still decades attached. Yeah, decades attached to those if you are convicted on those. So this is an ongoing battle, and her extraordinary optimism is always infectious, and gives us hope that we need. In Maria's case, over almost 60% of the online violence towards her that we studied was credibility-based, but 34% of the abuse that she experienced was personal abuse that was sexually explicit, misogynistic, and sexist. And just to kind of draw parallels with Rana's experience, some of the most vile imagery on the internet targeting you, Maria, includes your skin being likened to testicles, and you wearing, because you have a skin disorder, and your earrings are suddenly testicles, for example, on an image that's been manipulated. So this is really vile, gross stuff that is dehumanizing you, and that's what it's designed to do. We'll come back to the hope piece in a moment, but I want to move to Carole. In your case, which we analysed in the context of networked gaslighting, because that's to us what it felt like swimming in all of that data. So over 2 million Twitter posts that we analysed directed at you, and among the revolting abuse were clearly evident attempts to portray you as mentally unfit, as intellectually unfit to be a journalist. The hashtag crazy, and the abusive term crazy cat lady was one of the ones that stood out. So very much in a similar vein, 27% of the abuse that we detected. So we're looking at about a third in all of these cases of the abuse is misogynistic. Clearly, we're saying clearly misogynistic abuse. Can you talk to us, Carole, because you've also been pursued legally, not by the state, but by powerful, moneyed members of society, and pursued not in reference to taxation and economic crimes, but in reference to libel. Can you bring us up to date with where your situation is at, and at the same time help us to understand how you think the campaigns of online violence against you, and particularly the gendered nature of it, has affected you?
Ooh, I'm on. Thanks so much, Julie, and to Rana and to Maria. I love the fact that Maria is celebrating the fact that she's only got 3 criminal cases against her, and that's a cause for celebration. And that is why Maria is the person who I think so many of us look up to for how do you actually develop resilience in the face of this stuff. And Julie, the work that you've done around this has been so helpful and informative. And I didn't, until you did this study and Julie did this massively long interview with me, and I didn't understand it until you went and analysed it and did your report and put it down. And it was so helpful to me, not just because I can now go, there's actually, this stuff is real, I can point you to United Nations reports which has analysed this and shows that it's coordinated. I mean, that was one of the sort of key things which came out of Julie's report. She mapped the way that it was sort of systemic and it was coordinated. And the thing that I really learned from Maria, which is I did not understand until it happened to me, and then I still did not understand it, is I think in the sort of early days when I was doing this reporting, and I wasn't a public figure in any way until I started on this investigation into Cambridge Analytica and Brexit, but I really used Twitter as a way to kind of build interest in the it just became such a sort of helpful platform. And of course, the more interest that I got in it, obviously the more blowback I got. But I really didn't initially. It just did not get to me. I was very focused, and I could see what they were doing, which was coming after me because they couldn't go after the work. But it was only Maria, the thing that she sort of said about the way that it was that the way that she was attacked online and vilified, and how that created this sort of permission for then the legal attacks to start. It is, and you know, I remember sort of thinking about that. I was like, can you explain that to me again, Maria, how exactly that works? And then I realised that actually that was the same pattern I was experiencing, which was that this massive discrediting campaign of me as a conspiracy theorist, as a crazy cat lady, it became this polarising, because what I was reporting on was so polarising in Britain, Brexit, that I became a polarising figure. That was sort of intentional. It made me into this controversialist just through essentially doing investigative reporting. And it was, I think, because I became this, you know, I can refer to it as being a sort of culture war hate figure, that created the permission, the climate, that it made the sort of legal action against me viable, I think.
And the legal action was brought by the person we identified as the key protagonist, antagonist.
And that was extraordinary. When Julie's research showed that up, I did not know that. So, you know, this kind of insane. I mean, it is very much like the sort of modern version of a witch, which is that I get called the idea that sort of this a woman of a certain age who is sort of, you know, dinging. I was labelled the crazy cat lady. And yes, the man, the funder of Brexit, who took the legal case against me, which is still ongoing in some form, was the person who originated that and seeded that narrative, which, to give you an example of like how powerful these things are, you know, this is, you know, it's known that this was picked up by the right-wing press, by online trolls. But I met somebody at a party last night, a very nice man, who came up to me and said, "Oh, I'm a great admirer of your work, and I know that you have several cats, and I'm also an animal."
I know.
And I was like, no, that's actually the right-wing propaganda which they use against me. And he was, but I mean, I felt so sorry for him, because he sort of like made the ground like, you know, swallow me up at this point. But I mean, it is extraordinary, and that's just a tiny little example. But the greater narrative of how actually my reporting was in doubt, that I'd gone too far, that I couldn't prove it, that stuck for a really long time until I got a High Court judgment, which you know, ruled very, very carefully in a multi-paged document that it was actually all correct.
Yeah, and this is the difficulty we have to go to verify reportage in these contexts, but to have that confirmation, to have that evidence, to have that judgment is also, you know, exceptionally important as part of the fight back. But it's exhausting and incredibly costly in terms of monetary costs, but also in terms of you know, psychological and physiological costs as well. Marianna, I want to come to you now. We've also been studying the abuse towards you over several years. We're still analysing the full data set, but we've got two sets of data that we can share with people here, which you've actually integrated into your reporting, which I think makes our partnership quite unique and quite valuable. So I'm really glad you're able to join us despite the incredibly insane schedule that you have at the moment. So we did analyse 75,000 tweets towards Marianna between March and August 2021, at the height of her reportage on COVID-19 conspiracy theories and networks of conspiracy theorists, which she continued to pursue in the aftermath. But we found that more than half of the abuse, so 55% of the abuse towards her, was designed to discredit her and to tear her down in the context of respect for her public interest journalism. Again, 27%, so up around the 30% mark, was sexist and misogynistic. And she was, like all of the other women we've heard from today and the other women whose cases we've studied, frequently branded a liar. So the gaslighting includes falsely accusing the women journalists of being disinformation purveyors themselves, to invert the reality. But she was also called a prostitute, a silly woman, a nutter, and she, like Carole, is sitting in the UK. So this term prostitute actually began in India, according to research, and it has spread globally now, which is just vile.
It started with the defense minister of the country coining it.
Yeah. So with power connected to the deployment of said term. More recently, Marianna, we examined the period of time a period of time 2 months after Elon Musk took over Twitter, and we compared that to the exact same time period in the previous year. So we're talking about the end of 2022 being compared with the end of 2021, and we were able to determine, and when I say we, sorry, I haven't actually said this yet, and I don't know if she's in the audience, but Diana Maynard, who's a computer scientist from the University of Sheffield, and her team, including Kalina Boncheva, are the computer scientists behind this incredible work, and we collaborate very closely with them, bringing contextual and qualitative research, and we call these big data case studies. But just to point out, I am not the computer scientist. I thought I should make that very, very clear in case people are worried about what's happened here, unleashing me on all of this data as a computer scientist. But Marianna, to bring us back to that exposure that you've had to increasing online violence since Elon Musk bought Twitter, what we found was that there'd been a 30% increase, or sorry, not a 30% increase, a tripling rather of abuse towards you in that time frame. And so not only are you experiencing gendered online violence, gendered disinformation in the context of your reporting on disinformation networks, which is one of your main beats, but also in reference to trying to hold the technocrat to account at the helm of Twitter, Elon Musk. Can you share with us what it's been like being on the platform, since so much of the protection in terms of new initiatives, tech solutions and policies that were designed to protect women journalists like you have started to erode?
Absolutely, and thank you so much for having me, albeit virtually. And unlike Maria, I don't have a band in the background, but I do have a slightly croaky throat, so I'm sorry if you can't hear me, testament to my too busy schedule. But I'd like to start as well as thanking the incredible women who are on this panel, and thanking you, Julie, and the team at the International Centre for Journalists, and the team at Sheffield University as well for the work you do. And I think it's crucial to integrate it in the kinds of investigations I do, and it certainly matches up with what I hear from users, what I hear from insiders, what I hear from all kinds of different people, and has been a very important tool to shed a light on this, and as part of the journalism I do. And as you mentioned, particularly this recent investigation into Twitter. So for the BBC's Panorama, I looked into the changes at Twitter, triggered in part because I'd noticed that the hate I was experiencing did seem worse. And it's worth pointing out that Twitter, as I'm sure all of the women on this panel and lots of the people in the audience know, has never been perfect. And there's been a lot of online abuse for years on Twitter. But I had started to notice it was getting a little bit better. And then once Musk took over, it seemed to be getting worse again. And I was hearing that from all kinds of people, not just journalists, but people who experience homophobic hate, racist hate, anti-Semitic hate, all kinds of abuse online. And so that was why I kind of set out to investigate, to speak to people on the inside at Twitter, still there, who'd left, and who all revealed to me the expertise that had been lost, the job losses, and the changes in priorities under Musk, and what that meant for users like me, but also users all over the world. And their conclusion was that Twitter just can't protect users in the same way that it could before. And they showed me a lot of the work they were doing and the data that backed up how effective that work had been. And one person in particular who I spoke to was a woman called Lisa Jennings-Young, who worked in the content design team, and she designed all sorts of features that were intended for people who were experiencing abuse, particularly women and women journalists as well, to use. Things like the safety mode, which is a button you can apply to your account and it will automatically block abusive accounts, or this harmful reply nudge, which is a message sent to an account when it's sending out abuse. We tested out some of these functions and they appeared to be being applied inconsistently, and insiders still there, engineers in particular, told me about how this quote, which will always stay with me, it's like a building where all the pieces are on fire and it might look okay from the outside, but nothing is working on the inside, and there just aren't the people working on these tools like there were before. And all of that very much matches up with what the data that Julie and the team at the University of Sheffield analysed and found, that ultimately the abuse had improved slightly and then it got worse again. And actually the worst the abuse ever got was in my attempts to interview Elon Musk. I repeatedly bid him. I wanted to do an interview with him. I even went as far as doing a Twitter poll to see whether he would speak to me, but there was no response until the investigation went out. And when it went out, Elon Musk tweeted several times, and in one tweet he shared the investigation itself, which had a picture of me at the very top, and said something like, "Sorry for turning Twitter from nurturing paradise into place that has trolls." He'd not engaged with any of the very specific allegations that I'd put to him. I tried again to bid him, no response. But the hate that unleashed was up there in the kind of most hate I've experienced. Death threats, videos of women being kidnapped, really nasty abuse, misogynistic hate, a lot of "will come and get you," that kind of thing. And within a few minutes, Musk's tweet had confirmed very much what the Panorama investigation had revealed in the first place. But it also left me asking, freedom of expression appears to be one of the principles that is constantly cited as being at the heart of Twitter. What does it mean when a reporter, an investigative reporter, trying to hold someone like Elon Musk, one of the most powerful people in the world and richest people in the world, to account, when they're not able to do that without being targeted by hate, by troll armies, by people who are following a similar playbook to the one that's just been described on this panel? What does that mean for freedom of expression? Because it certainly makes it a lot harder to hold the social media companies to account than before.
Indeed.
And I should add that Twitter would say it's still, it still prioritizes defending the user's voice. I've never heard back from Elon Musk in reference to any of the allegations I raised in my investigation.
And not only that, and in addition to the tweet that you just described, I recall seeing a tweet from him where he actually said, "I quite like trolls," and it was in reference to a screen grab or a link, I can't remember which, to the investigation, to the BBC Panorama investigation. And I also watched, the pylon in reference to that. Our data also demonstrated the effect of the replatforming of previously banned or suspended accounts. And it's worth noting that Andrew Tate, who is Twitter's chief misogynist in residence, is not only out of prison but also back on Twitter again. So these are really significant challenges. Unfortunately, despite the optimism and the determination that we have, that there has to be a solution, because all of the gains that women have made, all of the work of women journalists over decades, especially in terms of being part of a public conversation, being visible, this cannot be allowed to deteriorate to the extent that women journalists again become invisible, and yet that is the effect we're dealing with. But here we are in the grip of frenzied concern and debate about generative AI. And I want to ask each of you, and I'll start with you, Maria, because you're already starting to laugh, possibly with a hint of despair there, about what the implications are, specifically for gendered disinformation and gendered online violence towards women journalists. But how are you reading this, this threat, I will call it a threat, where it becomes so much easier, so much cheaper, and to produce higher quality disinformation content?
Well, so first let's talk about, who is accountable, right? And in a lot of the work we've done, we've always pointed out that news organizations effectively lost our gatekeeping powers in 2014. Technology companies took over that role. Their design was exploited with these information operations that rippled through society, gave permission for kind of a bandwagon effect, actually much more than a bandwagon effect. So the first group that did abdicate responsibility are the tech companies. That's surveillance capitalism. We've talked about this a lot, for profit. Right? The second group that abdicated responsibility as well are democratic nations, are countries who have allowed these companies to move forward. And, when we talk about solutions, we talk about education, long-term, medium-term legislation. In the short term, we survive, right? There are other things that we try to do. Hold the line, for example, the coalition that you did, that's a kind of solidarity, but we need to move from civic engagement in the old world to dealing with what that means in an age of exponential lies, when, as you can see from both Marianna's, from all of our work, that it is impossible to do investigative journalism, holding power to account, whether that's a government or Elon Musk, right? Some of the most powerful moneyed figures in the world. Who gave Elon Musk that power to control large swaths of the public sphere globally? Actually, it's his power and money, and because governments have not put guardrails in place. So that's the second one. But in terms of the question, the first time that AI really, like, we worked with it and we encountered it as humanity is through social media. And we talked about how machine learning comes in and builds a model. Everything you post, it's a model of you that knows you better than you know yourself. And then AI comes in and takes all of our models, and that becomes the database that is used for micro-targeting. Let's remove some of those neutral words. Let's replace model with clone. So essentially, all of us on these platforms are cloned by machine learning, right? And then the companies say, because they use that, they then use AI to pull all of that to micro-target. What is micro-targeting? It isn't the same as advertising. Micro-targeting means that they take our weakest moment to a message and sell it for the highest bidder. So so what happens now? That's the unsophisticated AI. Now we're moving forward. We haven't actually finished dealing with this. The EU has come out with the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, that will be fully rolled out this year, but still not quite there, right? There's still a little bit of, it's up to the platforms to dictate, to declare what they see as harmful, not what is. No one has been held accountable for the genocide in Myanmar, for example, or for the violence on Capitol Hill on January 6th, or the clustering that brought together the supporters of Bolsonaro, the far-right fringe, with every conspiracy theory. This is a study that was done on YouTube that essentially brought Bolsonaro to power and enabled January 8th in Brazil. So today, what are we having to deal with? Now you have AI that is exponential. Meaning, think about it like this, right? GPT-2, which came out a few years ago, uses parameters, 1.5 billion parameters, right? So that means like word by word, and then the machine goes through 1.5 billion parameters. GPT-3, its successor, is 175 billion. So it went from 1.5 billion to 175 billion. No human mind does this, right? Now we're in GPT-4, which was just released, and we don't know what the parameters for that are. And GPT-5 will be released by December this year. This is not even on a scale that we can imagine, but beyond that, the makers themselves have said that this AI hallucinates. And I'll leave you with just one study that was done on in Silicon Valley, August 2022 last year. The people who are working on AI, the experts themselves, said that about 800 of them were surveyed, and 50% said that if this is released now, so it was released December, August to September to December, if it's released now, that there's a 10% or greater chance that it would lead to an extinction event.
And
sounds like we're living in like a science fiction world, right? But it is real.
yeah, and really serious. And with that in mind, Rana, if I can come back to you, you know, we've been struggling within a realm of trying to affect the policies at the platforms, of trying to respond as sort of the industry of journalism and civil society organisations to problems that were serious, multifaceted and incredibly challenging. And now we have this new surge. You're an independent journalist, you are a Washington Post columnist as well, working in a state that is clearly a declining democracy. These are the sorts of threats that we're exposed to now, with the escalating risk of disinformation, gendered disinformation, online violence becoming so much faster, more effective, and so on. What is it that you want the community of journalists to do in response to this increasing risk in the context of your ongoing experience of this kind of abuse? I mean, what do you hope can happen now to try to at least learn from the struggles that we've been through with the social media battles to this in this new territory?
Well, Julie, how do you solve a problem? You solve a problem when you concede that there is a problem. A big part of our media organizations do not still believe that this propaganda online is a problem. You know, when you go to the police station to file a complaint, they'll be like, but where did this complaint come? I'll say on Twitter or Instagram, it's like, oh, it was online, right? How do you fix a problem when you do not even concede that and acknowledge that there is a problem? I'm glad Maria brought up the point of the genocide in Myanmar. In India, where we have a Hindu nationalist government, we have lynchings of Muslim minorities on the streets, right? Muslims are being attacked systematically on Hindu festivals. How is that happening? How do people converge? How do people come together? They come together through social media platforms like Twitter, on TikTok or Instagram, where they show fake news stories of Hindus being attacked, and hence you are literally trying to provoke an audience to come on the streets and do mass violence against Muslims. In a country of 220 million Muslim minorities right now, India is seeing a surge in Hindu nationalism. A big part is that is being played is the disinformation campaign and the misinformation campaign that is being used through social media. And it's not that Elon Musk does not know about it, right? When Indian government took Twitter and 3 of us to court because they wanted Twitter to block some of our tweets, back in the day when Elon Musk had not taken over, Twitter took the case to the government of India, to the court, and said, we are not going to delete and block this content. But now with Elon Musk, you see what happened with the BBC documentary in India. The government of India asked Twitter to ban anybody sharing the BBC documentary, and Mr. Elon Musk, who claims to be a free speech absolutist, complied with the Indian government. Now we're talking about the BBC, we're not even talking about individual cases. When it comes to individual cases like us, we are sitting ducks. And I keep repeating this case of Gauri Lankesh, right? Gauri was a dear colleague of mine. Everybody here knows about, at least the colleagues know about Gauri Lankesh, an independent journalist in India speaking about Hindu nationalism. In the year 2017, Gauri had just translated my book in a regional language, a tell-all book on Narendra Modi. And I was facing this online harassment, and she wrote on my Facebook, babe, these are paper tigers, nincompoops, don't even spend more than 2 minutes on them. And she said, she gave her own example, saying, I keep getting these threats online, and I don't take them very seriously. I know it's a problem, but don't spend. And next day, Gauri was shot dead outside her house. And then there are still people who are saying, oh, this is just online violence. The problem with even the journalist community is that we believe that only if somebody is shot dead or arrested, then that person suffers from a problem. Maria has put this so many times, death by 1,000 cuts. You don't have to kill us anymore. You just have to, you'd have to chop us into pieces on social media. And well-meaning allies of ours too do not speak up in solidarity. That solidarity is missing. When you tell your colleagues, I mean, even your own colleagues call out your behavior. Even your colleagues say nasty things on Twitter, and then that becomes a Twitter trend saying, oh, your own people are saying that. And what happens, one point that we do not really acknowledge, and I hope I'm not taking much of your time here, is that the toll it takes on your mental health. When you are trending for 2-3 days, when your image is morphed on a porn video, right? When you're trending as a fraudster, a con on social media for 3 full days, and your neighbors are watching it, and everybody that you know watching it, you switch off, you remove Twitter because you don't know how to handle with it. You don't have the bandwidth to handle it. And that's something we do not talk about, that the price that we paid due to online harassment, the price that the anxiety attacks, the stuff that we face, the mental health impact that this has on us.
Indeed, and that's something, Carole, that you've spoken about as well. But I want to pick up on what Rana just referenced, which is the attitude of colleagues. We're at a journalism festival, and it's important to note that the disinformation narratives, the gendered disinformation that we've examined, has included initiated attacks on journalists by male journalists, or male-identifying journalists displaying misogynistic tendencies. And there's also been, as you've experienced, a kind of pile-on by partisan news outlets as well, legitimising the kinds of online violence that you've experienced. I know I sort of wanted to come here to talk, at this point, to talk about the AI threat, but we have to figure out how to deal holistically with this crisis and then apply those lessons to what's next. So do you have any advice for our colleagues in the room and watching online and in terms of reacting to this problem?
I mean, I think the thing which it took me a long time to see was this way that it's a system. And it's not just the individual trolls, it's not just the sort of partisan, articles. It's the way that they feed each other. And yes, journalists are out there on social media and they are part of that information sharing environment. And I think actually you highlighted it in your report. In my case, one of the biggest incidents which had a huge effect and has an ongoing effect came from a blue-ticked senior BBC presenter who did this misogynistic tweet about me, and that was, again, is this thing about creating permission. That created permission that then was sort of, latched onto and created waves upon waves of similar language. And, and I documented that. And I was really disappointed that the BBC refused to acknowledge it and realise that actually there are fine words about how we must protect journalists, we must safeguard them, but actually they were also part of that system.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think the thing about it is that I think the thing which combines, I think, us in a way is that it feels like we're the first wave. So essentially being a sort of female investigative reporter or reporting on these threats to democracy, it puts you in the first wave of people coming under attack with these new hybrid forms, which we're only just starting to understand. But they're down to zero, essentially. And so we're all going to be experiencing this. And I think, for me, the only plus point I can sort of say about it is that when you live these, by reporting on this sort of information warfare techniques, you become a target of it, you really do understand the ways that this system is worked and how entrapping it is, how you could just get sort of trapped in a sort of fake news superstorm, and there's no way out of it.
I'm going to have to stop you there, Carole, because we have one or 2 minutes left.
Go.
Given when we started. I want to come to Marianna. Marianna mentioned, of course, one of your former colleagues at the BBC. I don't want to put you on the spot to respond to that, but what I would like to ask you, Marianna, reporting on disinformation, which exposes you to increased gendered disinformation, of course, what have you learned about what news organisations need to do or should be doing to respond to this, to better protect women journalists, even as the threats escalate?
I think one thing that, and you sort of touched on it there, Carole, and Maria has said it to me before as well. People often say, I don't know, why do you keep doing it? Or why do you keep covering this stuff? Or why do you keep reporting on disinformation and social media? Wouldn't it be easier to just switch off from it all? And actually, to some extent, I don't know if like is the right word, but to be able to experience how these tactics work myself helps me better report on them and investigate them and expose them. And I think that the greater understanding that audiences and news organizations have about just how this works, how disinformation tactics work, how online hate works is vital. I'm very passionate about including that in my reporting and using that, and I find that a really positive way of dealing with it as well, because I want to investigate it, I want to expose it.
All right, we're going to have to wind it up, Marianna. I'm really sorry. There's so much more to say about this. We are over time, and we started slightly late, so I'm going to end it here. I am going to encourage people in the audience who are able and willing to stay for the next session, which is a really important discussion about Jimmy Lai, who's imprisoned in Hong Kong, and his son Sebastian Lai will be part of this panel. So you can stay here if you want to avoid the walk up the hill, but you'll get the great benefit of exposure to a really important discussion. Thank you very much for being here today.
See you later.